Hi, everybody. AlBernstein here for our big time boxing show. And on this episode, we're going to relive some great moments of the past with a gentleman who has chronicled so many of these great moments in television. The fine television producer, director, Marty Corwin, who has had a very unique history in the sport of boxing. In that, among his many other accomplishments, he's the only person who has worked as the head of production for both Bob Arum and the Top Rank Boxing Company and Don King and Don King Promotions. So he has had a very unique view of the sport of boxing, and that led him to write a book that is currently out, published by Rowman and Littlefield, called Arum and King, 6 Decades of Boxing Gold. I love the title of that book. And it has some great stories and great insights into these two men who helped shape decades and decades of the sport of boxing and are arguably two of the largest figures looming over boxing, maybe in the sport's entire history. So with all that said, let me bring in to the fray my good friend, a man I've had the pleasure of working with on many occasions. He is one of the most beloved and respected men in television, especially in the boxing world, my good friend Marty Corwin. Marty, how are you?
Al, it's a pleasure, and thanks for having me on. And I was trying to think, trying to remember when we first met, and I came
Boy, a
up
long
with
time.
31 years ago.
Wow,
So,
that's wild.
thank,
Yeah, it's the and I can't wait to dig into the topics here, but it is interesting because you, I know you mostly from your work with Bob Arum because I didn't do that much with Don King in terms of his company. But of course, I knew King and I worked on many shows that he promoted, but most often when I was doing it, I was working for a network as opposed to for his company. So we mostly worked when you were doing stuff with Bob Arum, and of course, we had many great experiences, and it was
I
always
just
fun.
remember you at every big event. I mean, you and I got to know each other even before we worked together.
That's true. We did. Yeah, that's a very good point. We knew each other from just being around those big events, and it was a grand time for the sport of boxing for sure. So when I first heard that you had done this, I thought it was intriguing because you are well positioned to do this, as well positioned as anybody. I think I could imagine to do a book that puts both Arum and King side by side. And I think that's really a brilliant idea because as different as these two men are, their impact on the sport of boxing was remarkable in the same way, wasn't it?
Yeah, and you hit on a big theme in the book that these two guys couldn't have come from
Mm.
more different backgrounds. I kind of highlighted, I gave the introduction speech for both of their Hall of Fame inductions in the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame. And when I talked about, Bob Arum, a Jewish Harvard cum laude attorney who came from the Justice Department of Robert Kennedy to eventually, get to the pinnacle of boxing, and Don King, who as a young man in Cleveland was some kind of community organizer, a joke I stole from Mr. Obama. And they both wound up at the same place at the top. Couldn't have come from different places, but they both had that impact. And so that's really the heart of the book, talking about their accomplishments. Love them or hate them, it's hard to deny their accomplishments.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Obviously, when you're a larger than life figure in any walk of life and you're creating this much, you're going to have your friends, you're going to have your detractors. Both of these men were hard driving men who wanted only to succeed. And so you're right. Some people are going to react positively, some negatively, but there is no denying the, um, the impact they had. What was their reaction when they found out that you were writing this book?
originally, and this is now going back a couple of years, when I had I had the idea to write the book, I mentioned it to Bob, who I was working with, and he said, "No, no, no, you don't want to do that," just because he wasn't really interested in sitting down and spending a lot of time talking.
Yeah,
I had to
exactly.
grab Bob little pieces here and there. He didn't want to sit for long interviews, stuff like that. When I talked to King about it on the phone, basically he was like, well, yeah, yeah, man, we got to talk about that, and then kept putting me off, putting me off, putting me off. So, a lot of a lot of what's in the book came from little snippets of interviews rather than long interviews with either one of them.
But that's okay, really. In my mind, it's definitely okay because this was your chronicling of what you saw. And while their ideas are a part of it, you watch them say things in real time that you
Right.
can take. So I want that. It's funny in the book. I'm happy to see, and I want the way you're seeing it. You're a storyteller in any case, and so I think it's interesting. Did either of them mind being in the same book with the other person? Did they mind that it was split?
Neither one of them has said anything in the way of an objection to that. It
Okay.
was, and really, I didn't set out initially to write this book. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
originally, it got started because I wanted to write down some of the stories of things that in my 44 years in television, I started putting down stories of stuff that happened on the road, 44 years of sports
Mm-hmm.
broadcasting, all on the road. And I was going to share it with friends. It was a friend of mine named Dominic Biondi, who is a professor of English creative writing, who said, "No, no, you should get this published." I said, "You're crazy. Who'd want to publish this?" And I wrote a couple of letters to publishers, kind of to prove him wrong. And the fourth letter I wrote, which went to Roman and Littlefield, they said, "Well, we don't really publish boxing books anymore, but this one's different because it comes from the perspective of a
Mm-hmm.
TV producer." So this book
Mm-hmm.
really, it is a dual biography about Bob Arum and Don King, but there's a lot more in it. I talk about the 44 years of changes I've seen in live
Right.
sports production. I talk
Yeah.
about some stories of people on the road. I don't know if you remember a guy by the name of the Colonel. Me and
Oh
him
boy.
traveling the world.
Bob Sheridan, a gentleman that we both, of course, worked with many times. You and Bob were many time collaborators, and he was for people in boxing. Many of them know him. He was a ubiquitous. Amazing guy, one of the true characters in the sport of boxing, and was a broadcaster who did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands, I guess, of boxing matches.
I explain him. I explain him to people as a perfect cross between Spanky McFarlane and John Candy.
Well put, very well put. It captures the nature of the Colonel Bob, and yeah, you more than maybe almost anybody shaped his broadcasting, a lot of his broadcasting career, because he, like you, worked with both Arum and King, didn't he?
I brought him to Arum. People said he can't do Top Rank. He's King's guy. I said, well, but he's the reason I loved the Colonel and I brought him over wasn't just because he was my friend. He was a great announcer because he made a lousy fight good, a good fight great, and a great fight unforgettable. He was a great entertainer. Never claimed to be a journalist. He never claimed to be unbiased or a journalist. He just was entertaining to listen to. And if you had a
Yeah.
problem, one time in Thackerville, Oklahoma, we had a ring rope break, and it took him an hour to fix it. The Colonel filled with stories. How many guys can do that, Al?
Yeah, no, it is true. Sometimes those pesky facts got in the way, but he was always able to weave himself around them. So the nature of Arum and King's rivalry is interesting. It was uh, a natural rivalry because they were the two dominant promoters in the sport for so long. How would
Right.
you describe their rivalry? And you talk about it in the book, of course, a lot.
Mhm.
What's the Cliff Notes version of their rivalry and how you would describe it?
Well, it wasn't a myth. They really did dislike each other. And it started, right off the bat. Bob Arum was the promoter for Muhammad Ali. And that was
Yes.
his prime focus, was promoting with Muhammad Ali. He was, that was his main focus back then. King came in 1974, he kind of went to steal Muhammad Ali, and
Yes,
that
right.
obviously created a bit of a problem. When they first worked together on the Rumble in the Jungle, people don't remember that Arum had something to do with that fight too.
Yeah.
They just didn't get along; they didn't like each other. But the way I describe their relationship, for the most part, is there were a couple of lions who, when it made sense, they could hunt together. They would, Bob always said, I can work with anybody. And if the deal was right, he said that once the bluster was over, when they did a deal and they did a fight together, he said King was fine to work with. He kept his
Yeah.
end of the bargains, and he was okay working with King. It's just you had to get by the bluster. And
Yeah.
that was, he said he could work with anybody. And King, too. I interviewed the two of them side by side about 12 years ago when Mayorga fought Cotto. And the two of them sat side by side and laughed together, told stories together, and they both said the same thing. Look, when it made sense, I could work with this guy.
Yeah, during that, it's funny you're mentioning that fight because I believe that was a Showtime fight, and I did it was a stream with both Arum and King at that time because of the nature of that fight. Like you said, you did an interview with them. I did a thing that was a streaming thing that you probably sent out to the world, where I had both of them on each side of me, and it was fascinating because they were ruminating, as you say, about all the things that had gone on. And one of the Ali thing was interesting. I had it down to ask in any case. You led me there. The interesting thing to me is how Ali reacted to each of them differently. Here he was dealing with Bob Arum, the buttoned up, Ivy League lawyer, formerly with the government, and Don King, decidedly different. How did Ali see those two men?
Well, a lot of people don't realize Muhammad Ali started both of them.
Yeah,
Muhammad
exactly.
Ali started Bob Arum in 1964, really, when Arum worked on an Ali fight, which was being promoted by a guy named Lester Mallets, when Ali fought Terrell, was supposed to fight Terrell. And Bob Arum helped him out with some legal work. He had met Lester Mallets in 1962 when he was sent by the Justice Department to grab the purses from Liston Patterson. And he was coming from the Justice Department to grab those purses because one of the promoters, Roy Cohen, was doing some illegal things with the money, so the Justice Department intervened. That's when he met Lester Mallets. A couple of years later, Mallets asked Bob to do some legal work for him. That's when he got involved. He suggested on this fight that wasn't doing that well that, well, maybe they could get some more eyeballs if they got a celebrity black athlete as a color commentator, already thinking like a promoter. And he went and he tried to get Willie Mays involved. And Willie Mays, who he knew how to reach, Willie Mays says, no, I don't know anything about boxing. Why don't you try Jim Brown? So he called Jim Brown. Jim Brown got involved, and he was happy to do it. And in the course of that event, Jim Brown said to Bob Arum, he says, no, you shouldn't be behind the scenes. You should be a promoter. And he introduced him to Muhammad Ali, and Ali brought Bob Arum into his main bouts company, along with a couple others like Lester Mallets, and that's how he got a start. Now, when King left prison after his 3-year term for manslaughter, he got Muhammad Ali to participate in a charity exhibition boxing match to save a Cleveland hospital, and that's how he met him. And it was, Muhammad Ali who said to King, we don't have any black promoters. Man, you're gifted gab. You should be a promoter. So Ali started both of them. A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, that's intriguing, and obviously that was the beginning for both of them of an amazing run. During the course of their promoting, you mentioned they promoted many fights together. One of the most famous was Oscar De La Hoya and Felix Trinidad, which was fraught with, it's the major fight in boxing at the time, and a true mega fight. And fight went, everything about this fight lived up to its billing in the sense that the promotion leading up to it was amazing, and the fight itself was very close. ended up with a very close decision won by Trinidad. And that night, among the many things that went on, Don King uttered the famous words, "Tonight the lights went out in Aramville," which was typical Don King bluster.
Yeah.
That fight seemed to me to be the pinnacle of their rivalry in a lot of ways, wasn't it?
Yes. I mean, there were several, but that was certainly one.
There's one of them
You know,
anyway, yeah.
yeah, I mean, they had a few fights together that, were, real problems. I mean, you could go back to when Holmes fought Tyson, there were a lot of fights that were problematic. One of the things I really try to bring out in the book is how difficult it is to be a boxing promoter. There's a whole chapter on boxing promoters. What is a boxing promoter? I try to describe because people don't know. They see a promoter like King or Arum get in the ring after a fight or at a press conference, and they think that's what it is to be a promoter. That's a minuscule fraction of the job. So I try to explain what a promoter really does and why it's one of the hardest jobs in the world. These guys have to face pitfalls and bumps in the road every step of the way on almost every promotion. I give one example. I'll tell this really quickly. Arum's first promotion. Arum's first promotion in, I think it was in March of '66, when Ali fought George Chuvalo in Toronto. Bob Arum's first promotion, when he was the promoter of record, he says it was his hardest promotion ever. 10,000 fights later, he says his first promotion was the hardest ever because of what he had to go through to get that fight done. It was originally going to be Ali Terrell. They were originally going to fight that in the U.S. Mayors in the U.S. got together and said he can't fight here because of Ali's stance on the draft. So then they were moving the fight to Montreal. Montreal agreed to have the fight. It was all set. And then the Veterans Association in America threatened to boycott Expo in Canada if the mayor allowed the fight to go on. So he had to change his mind and cancel it. Then the fight moves to Toronto. It's going to be at Maple Leaf Gardens. And Conn Smythe, who built Maple Leaf Gardens, said, hell no. He was a veteran. He didn't want it to be in that building because of his objection to Ali. So they finally took it to the city council, who agreed to have the fight. And Conn Smythe sold his interest in the team, the Maple Leafs, never stepped foot in the Toronto Maple Leaf Gardens again. The building he built. How's that for your first promotion?
Wow.
And of course, Terrell backed out 17 days before the event, and they had to get George Chuvalo to replace him. That's a tough promotion.
That is truly amazing. Yeah, that's pretty wild. Isn't it funny when you mention Conn Smythe? The whole world knows him as the person whose name is on the hockey award, right? But and of course he was a larger than life figure in Canada. Arum, talking about Arum for a second, and I'm curious to get your take on this as part of what you wrote and what you observed. Bob Arum and I met him in 1980 when I started doing the Top Rank Boxing series on ESPN, first national television job I'd ever had.
The start of 13 years.
Yeah, and of that series, which was pretty remarkable. And over all the years in seeing him, from my standpoint, there was a discernible change in him in that the early Bob Arum wanted very much to be in the background and didn't seem to embrace the idea that King had, of course, where the promoter should be out front and more flamboyant and more of a presence. As time went on, that changed. Where he was more interested and comfortable and they even changed the name of the company, if I'm not mistaken, to Bob Arum's Top Rank Boxing. How did you see that evolve from your vantage point?
Well, I talk in the book a lot about the differences and similarities of these two men.
Yeah.
On the point you're just bringing up, Bob Arum, he may have gone from a little more behind the scenes to a little more on camera, but he still was the same person. Bob Arum, to me, who I've always said is like my favorite uncle,
Yeah.
He always was straight. He was the same guy in the office as he was in a press conference. He spoke his mind. He was very
Yeah.
direct, but
Yeah.
he was always the same guy. By contrast, Don King was two people. When my wife, who happens to have her law degree and was an accountant, she worked for Price Waterhouse. And I'm only telling you this because her opinion has validity. She dealt with CEOs in Hollywood, some of the top CEOs in the entertainment business in Hollywood. She knew these guys. So when
Mm-hmm.
she first met Don King, we're in the back of a press conference setting up in Vegas, and she's at a table way in the back, and I was sitting with her, and King was at the next table with Kirk Kerkorian and the heads, Tony Cox, and some of the heads of Showtime, and they were all there, and they were having this meeting. And she said, "You can't help but hear King. He sounded like a Fortune 100 CEO." She's listening to him do business. She couldn't believe his brilliant business sense and the way he's talking to these obviously also brilliant businessmen about whatever deal they were talking about, whatever equity was involved and the return on investment, she said he just sounded like a brilliant CEO that she could hear. And then Mike Marley came over and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Don, it's showtime." And he started to stand up, finished his sentence, put the cigar in his mouth, picked up the flags, put on his jacket, and she says he changed into a cartoon character of himself, and she referred to it as the de-evolution of man. Like that, when you see the 12 figures of man going from the ape all the way up to man, she said it was the opposite. He went the other way. The de-evolution of man. He went from that brilliant Gordon Gekko CEO to all in America. Don't ever forget it. She said it was, my point is, he was two people.
That's interesting. That is intriguing. And I'll tell you something intriguing. So here's the story about Don King. It's that I mentioned that I didn't work so much with King directly as involved in his shows, and so my interaction with him was a little less. It was more in public and in a more of a just a regular press conference setting and et cetera. And here's the funny thing. So my house we had a house fire at my house around 2000. And it was in the news and everything, and we were moved. We had, while the house was being fixed up, we had to move into a rental house. And to the best of my knowledge, I didn't think anybody had the phone number of this rental house, other than people I had given it to call. My wife answers the phone at this rental house we're living in while they fix up the thing, and she's got a kind of a quizzical look on her face, and she said, "It's for you." She said, "I think it's Don King." Get on the phone, and it's Don King, who is telling me how bad he feels about the house fire, and is there anything he can do to be helpful, and was being a solicitor. And I never forget that. I'll never forget that because it wasn't like I was having regular dealings with him. And I thought to myself, how interesting, and this speaks to a question I want to ask you. There are probably many people out there that wouldn't think I would get that phone call from Don King. And it was unexpected to me as well, only because I wasn't around him all the time. And it brings me to this question. What are the most surprising things about both King and Arum that you think people would really be, and you explain them a lot of them in the book, of course. What are the things that people will be surprised to know about these two men?
Well, starting with King, I was shocked when I first met him. I had spent 12 years doing NBA, NHL, and Major League Baseball with Viacom before I got into boxing. I was doing the Bullets, the Caps, and the Orioles for Viacom. And for all your young listeners, the Bullets are now called the Wizards. So when I first met Don King, I was shocked. Instantly, I recognized this is probably the smartest man I've ever met. And I wasn't prepared for that. I wasn't expecting that this guy was that brilliant. And he really is. His photographic memory is brilliant. But the other thing, and this ties right into what you were saying, it doesn't surprise me at all that he called you and expressed sympathy for your situation.
I don't know how he found the phone number. You had to do some work.
Well,
so
that I can't speak to, but
yeah.
was an incredibly charitable person, and he didn't let the media show up when he
Yeah.
did give to people.
Interesting.
We did something every year called the Turkey Tour, and the staff named it the Turkey Tour. He would go into cities and show up with 3 tractor trailers full of large frozen turkeys, and it would be set up by his people in advance. We'd go to churches, to mosques, to community centers, and they would have their people lined up in advance with like a ticket, and we would be out there in line, all the staff, handing out turkeys to people right before Thanksgiving. And he would never let the press show up to turkey tours because he says, "No, it ain't about that." You know, he just did it because he wanted to do it. So that's one aspect. I also went with him to an event for like 5 hours in New York City that the New York Police Sergeants Association put together for the families of fallen officers. And we spent 5 hours there, and he was introduced to one family after another. And I'll never forget when we first got there, and I don't remember the name, so I'll just say it like this. He's, "Mr. King, I want you to meet, this is Mrs. Taylor and her husband, Dami. He was killed in a bad drug raid. These are her kids, Tanika and Tanya and Chris and their father, blah, 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 blah." 5 hours later, as we're leaving the event, "Oh, Mrs. Taylor, your husband, Dami, he didn't die in vain. And Tamika, Tommy, and Chris, your father was a great man." How did he remember that? He had just met hundreds of people. 5 hours later, he remembered all of their names. That was the most impressive thing I ever saw. So King, to me, the 2 impressive things were his charity, which was real and genuine, and his intelligence, which really surprised me. Bob Arum, I don't understand, what prompted him to make the change he made, but he was clearly at the top of the legal profession and he could have been doing that the rest of his life. What made him change to get into boxing, what attracted him to boxing in the first place, really surprised me. But he also, when he was challenged many times on contracts and things, he almost always prevailed because his contracts were pretty well done because he was a brilliant lawyer. So his skills and his abilities, but most importantly, his work ethic. What really surprised me about Don, but especially about Bob Arum, works all the time. And I explained in my description in the book on what is a promoter. They don't realize what that job entails. They work all the time, day after day, 20 hours a day. They're negotiating in the middle of the night with fighters, because the pitfalls I talked about earlier might come from your own fighters, where they all of a sudden throw bumps in the road. So that is the hardest job imaginable because you are on it 24/7. There's no time off. Bob doesn't take time off. And he has an unbelievable work ethic and ability to work around the clock. That impressed the hell out of me with both of those guys, but especially with Bob.
Interesting. Are you so with this project, and it ties together? It's obviously not all of what you've done in television, but it ties together a big chunk of it. Was it kind of fun and cathartic to actually go through the process and work this through and talk about these 2 guys that have played such a outsized role in your career?
Yeah, and like I say, I started it originally just to get the stories down. I mean, I'm getting older, so I wanted to put the stories down before I forgot them. That's what really started me off doing it, and it wasn't until Dominic says, "Hey, this can get published," that I said, "Yeah, well, we'll see." So yes, very cathartic in getting the stories down because there's some funny stories in the book, especially about traveling with the Colonel and some of the stuff that happened. But there's really something, even if you're a diehard boxing fan like you, Al, you may know these fights. You may know a lot of these events, and you might think to yourself, well, I don't need to read what this TV producer told me about the great fights of Arum and King. But there might be things about those fights you didn't know. There might be little pearls in there that you didn't know about. For example, did you know that Wilt Chamberlain was going to fight Muhammad Ali? The fight was set for the Houston Astrodome. It was all set, and everything was going great until the press conference. And Bob Arum told Muhammad Ali, said, "Now don't say anything to Wilt because he hasn't signed the contract yet. Don't get him upset." And Wilt showed up at the press conference at the Houston Astrodome. bent at the waist to get through the door into the press conference, and Ali goes, "Timber!" And Wilt turned around, found a phone, called Jack Kent Cooke, made his deal for the Lakers, and left. Customato was going to train Wilt Chamberlain.
Oh, wow.
Little
That's
tidbits
great.
like that. Even if you're a big boxing fan, you might not have known that. Or you might not have known that Arum promoted Evel Knievel's Snake River
Yes.
Canyon jump. And when
Yeah,
he got,
that is pretty extraordinary.
yeah, and when he first met Evel Knievel, talking about I can work with anybody, Evel Knievel said to Bob Arum to his face, he said, "I can't stand New Yorkers, Jews, and lawyers." And Bob said, "Well, I got the trifecta there." Or that you may not have known that Don King was the promoter for the Jackson Family Victory Tour.
Right.
And I tell stories about that too. He's the one who made a deal behind the back of the Jacksons for Pepsi to be the lead sponsor. Michael didn't like it because he didn't drink Pepsi. They were working on a deal for Quaker Oats, and King's deal had to stay because he had already signed it. And they made Michael do commercials for Pepsi, which he hated because he didn't drink it. And one of the commercials had special effects which lit his hair on fire.
Yes.
And that's when Michael Jackson started taking painkillers.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I do remember the incident. That's fascinating. Well, I think that and other things in the book are the exact reason why people should get your book, because you have a unique place where you could see these two men and see all the incidents. And I learned a long time ago that just when you think a certain topic, you've seen everything or heard everything that you can hear or see about it. When someone comes along who's a good storyteller and has a unique vantage point, you still are interested in seeing it. And this book is the classic example of that, because you were in a unique position to see these two men, and many of not just the stories, but even your insights into them will be different and enlightening for people. And everybody should get a copy of this, Arum and King, 6 decades of boxing gold. I think it's great that you took the time to and made the effort to chronicle this, and everyone will get a kick out of seeing all these stories and seeing what you did about these two men.
Thanks, Al. It wasn't a regular job.
No, it was not. Definitely not a regular job. And of course, you continued to work as the head of production for Top Rank and Bob Arum.
Yeah.
You and I both have been in this industry for a long time, and the nature of boxing is constantly one that evolves, and it's in the process of evolving now. Are you enjoying being involved in the sport? I mean, I personally tell people that doing our craft is what makes it intriguing and interesting, and it's the thing that we get a kick out of. And so despite all the seismic changes that may happen around us, that craft doesn't change. So I'm assuming you're enjoying the process as much as always.
I feel very fortunate. I realize how lucky I am and what I've been through and what I was able to do. Very, very grateful. I really missed, I'm not saying this just because it's you, Al, I really miss my old friends at Showtime, because when I started in boxing, Don King was tied to Showtime. And the first people that I really met in boxing, and I had done NBA, NHL, and Major League Baseball, but that was nothing like boxing. And if it weren't for some really good friends over the years like Gordon Hall, who really helped me and taught me the ropes of boxing, early on, David Dinkins and Ray Smaltz and the great guys at Showtime, I'm very grateful to them, and I miss them terribly because I'm very lucky to have had those people. I worked with HBO for 17 years. That was one of the best teams ever assembled also for boxing.
Yeah.
But the people that I work with now at Showtime, at ESPN, absolutely like a family. I feel very grateful to be working with these for the last 7 years with these people at ESPN. They are not only absolutely top flight television production people for boxing, they really are like a family, and I love working with these people. So most of all, extremely grateful, and I do realize how fortunate I've been.
Well, and to tell the world this, because they don't you're a behind the scenes guy. What you contribute to all that, because your nature in the sport. I said at the beginning that there are people. All, Most everybody that interacts with you and that has had something to do with you during the course of your career has come away from that experience feeling better, not worse, and has come away with strong feelings for you and a very congenial feeling about how your effort to just get the job done and do it in a fun way without adding any drama or any mercurial things to it. And you're just a straightforward, great guy that knows his craft and has enjoyed doing it with everybody. And you embrace all people that come into your circle, so that's a plus.
Thank you very much, Al.
Well, you've been special in this business, and the book, Arum and King: 6 Decades of Boxing Gold. I strongly recommend it to everybody. It's a great. The topic is endlessly fascinating, and you've provided some very unique vantage points. So, Marty, I really appreciate you taking the time, and good luck with the book.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It was great seeing you, even this way.
Even via digital, which is go over. We're going to have to hang out a little bit. I'm going to be over at the March 29th fight with
Great.
with Sandy Ryan and Michaela Meyer. So I got to look
Michaela
you up
Mayer.
and say hi. All right, Marty Corwin, fantastic book, Arum and King: 6 Decades of Boxing Gold, and stay with us in coming weeks. We've got some great guests on hand for the Big Time Boxing Show, and I think you're going to really enjoy a lot of the folks that we're going to be bringing you. So stay with us here on the Salita YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time.